Good morning from Hunt City Congregational Christian Church. We're talking about prayer. I want to look at one of the prayers of Jesus in the book of John. We're going to read John 11:38 through 48. It's when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And he who had died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Loose him and let him go." Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things Jesus did. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, "What shall we do? For this man works many signs. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and nation." Remember the setup to this story. Jesus and his disciples were away. Word is sent to Jesus that his friend Lazarus is sick. He delays in going back to where Lazarus, Mary, and Martha are. He tells his disciples Lazarus is dead. When he gets to where Lazarus and his sisters are, they meet him and they both basically say the same thing. "Jesus, if you would have just been here, he wouldn't have died. If you had come sooner, if you had dropped what you were doing and came immediately, he would not have died." And they take Jesus to the tomb where Jesus was laid. When he saw Lazarus' family and friends crying over his loss, Jesus wept with them. He mourned with them. Then they took away the stone from the place. He said, "Take away the stone." This was a step of faith. Jesus compelled Mary and Martha and others that were gathered there to remove the stone. That one of the girls said, "Hey, he's been dead 4 days. There's going to be a bad odor." Jesus said, "Take away the stone." They did it. So this showed an act of faith on their part. Jesus fulfilled the truth that he said, that he is the life, that they would see a glimpse of his glory. Jesus prayed. It says he lifted up his eyes. My commentary says Jesus likely had the traditional posture of prayer, hands raised, eyes open upwards as if looking towards heaven. And he says, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Jesus was confident in his relationship with the Father. The public nature of the prayer, it wasn't for Jesus. It was for Mary and Martha and for the people who were standing by. The power of Jesus' prayer was rooted in all of the private times. Many times it says he went off by himself to pray. That's when he did that's where the power was in his prayer. Here he knew what he was going to do, and this prayer was for the people standing by. Was this particular prayer a fervent prayer? It doesn't seem so. The stone had already been rolled away when he's praying this. And then he cries out with a loud voice. He says, "Lazarus, come forth." And others whom God used to raise the dead, or when Jesus raised the son of the widow who had died, others that he raised from the dead, it was a little more elaborate than this. Sometimes it was more private than this. This was very public. But it was for them. He speaks with authority, "Lazarus, come forth." And that wasn't because a loud voice was needed for Lazarus to hear. It was so that the crowd would know that this was no work of magic, but the power of God. Jesus had said on a previous occasion that a time would come when all who were in the graves would hear his voice. And this was a demonstration of the authority that Jesus had. Jesus spoke to a dead body as if Lazarus was alive because he is God who gives life to the dead and calls things which do not exist as though they did, Romans 4:17. The words spoken were brief and direct. And again, the commentary says they were spoken directly to Lazarus. If Jesus had not spoken directly to Lazarus and he said, "Come forth," there could have been hundreds or thousands of dead people come forth. Think of that. That's mind-blowing. That's incomprehensible to think that. But he directed this only at Lazarus. He says, "Lazarus, come forth." It was as if Jesus were directing someone out of a dark place. Remember, Jesus said, "I am the way." And he's saying to Lazarus, come this way. Jesus fought death at Lazarus' tomb, and he won. Jesus told death that he would soon completely conquer it. Lazarus was wrapped in burial cloths. My commentary makes an interesting point. I don't totally understand this. It says Lazarus was not resurrected, but resuscitated. He arose bound in grave cloths because he would need them again. Think about that. Lazarus would die again. So they kept the grave clothes. When Jesus was resurrected, when he left the tomb, he left the burial clothes behind. He would have no more need for them. Charles Spurgeon said, "How he moved, I do not know." This is talking about Lazarus. "How he moved, I do not know. Some of the old writers thought that he glided, as it were, through the air, and that this was part of the miracle. I think he may have been so bound that though he could not freely walk, he could shuffle like a man in a sack." So says Charles Spurgeon. Jesus did not miraculously remove the grave clothes. He had the people do that. He did what only God could do, and then he asked or commanded the people to unwrap Lazarus from the grave clothes. Jesus did what only God would do with discipleship, and then now looks for our cooperation with discipleship, with evangelism. God's consistent through his word. God does what God will do, and he calls man to act on his behalf. Many people believed, many people saw what happened, and it says they believed in Jesus, but yet others left and went to the Pharisees and said, "This man is doing this." It's amazing that they would see this miracle, yet still have hardness in their hearts towards Jesus. And Charles Spurgeon calls the reporting of this miracle to the Pharisees some of the meanest conduct that's ever been recorded in history. Instead of rejoicing with Mary and Martha and Lazarus, they run to the Pharisees and say, here's what Jesus did. So it says that they gathered a council, though it was unofficial. It was a meeting of the Sanhedrin. And they talk about this. And the religious leaders privately admitted Jesus performed signs that authenticated that he was who he said he was. And as Jesus claimed, his works bore witness of him. Their opposition changed. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, they disagreed with Jesus. They opposed Jesus because they didn't believe he was the Messiah. Now they're starting to oppose him because he could be the Messiah. Their hearts have changed, but they're still against him. They admitted the miracles, but look how they treated him. They denied him and opposed him. They were afraid of his influence over people and what that would do to their influence. They were afraid that their influence would decrease and he would increase. Just as John the Baptist said, he must increase, I must decrease. The Pharisees were not willing to do that. They did not want to decrease, and they did not want to see Christ increase. If we let him alone, they say everyone will believe in him. They knew that's the logical response to seeing these miracles, and they feared that more people would believe. That's a wonderful thought here. If they just left Jesus alone, his glory would draw people. The Pharisees were wrong. In the sovereign will of God, it's just because the Pharisees did not leave Christ alone that we believe and worship him. Ironic. The Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation, they said. As Jesus attracted more followers The religious leaders found that the Romans would regard it as a threat, and they might exercise more power, more domination in Israel. In John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And in this passage, he proves that he is the life. He gave life to Lazarus when he was born. He gave life to Lazarus again by raising him from the dead. And Jesus' prayer is short, and again, it was to benefit those that were listening. And we can take away some things from this passage. Our prayers don't have to be long. Sometimes our prayers, when we pray corporately, we are praying to lift others up, to edify others. But mostly we should pray like Jesus said in the parable of the publican and the Pharisee, just to ourselves, just to God, humbly before God, not to be boastful before men. But sometimes when we pray in public, our prayer is for the building up of the body. And that's what Jesus' prayer was. It was to call people to believe. Here's an opportunity right now for you to believe that I am the Messiah when you see what I'm going to do with this dead man. And there will always be some who believe and some who won't, and that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to believe, to be obedient, and to keep planting seeds. So let's do that this week. Let's believe, keep believing. That's the first work of the believer, of Jesus, the follower of Jesus. The first work is to believe, and then we're to be obedient, and we're just to keep planting seeds and trust that some of that seed will fall on good ground. God bless you. Hope you have a great week, and stay in the Word.